Good afternoon. Welcome to Hope Looks Up Bible Study on Tuesday, February 28th, 2023. My name is Chuck Eaton. I am pleased to be the host of the Hope Looks Up Bible Study. Hope Looks Up Ministry mission is to form a ministry geared to give hope, encourage, educate, uplift, and lead people to Jesus Christ for life direction. To accomplish this, we hold Bible studies like this one. We hold them here in person now, on Zoom, and on YouTube. We provide notes after each study, and we also have a Hope Looks Up website called hopelooksup.org. Today's lesson is the 8th of the series, 10-week series that we've been under, Do Current Events Match Bible Prophecies? Today's lesson is as I said, was the 8th. And it is titled, How is Abortion an End Times Barometer? The scripture is 1 Kings 18 and Psalms 62. We are pleased that you have chosen to join us in person on Zoom and on YouTube. There are two parts to our study, teaching and prayer time. Prayer time will follow teaching and is optional for those who have urgent prayer needs. If you have any questions during the study, as Tom mentioned, there's sheets on the table. Please write them down and you can turn them in after he's through teaching. For those on Zoom, you're able to ask a question by using the chat feature on Zoom and directing it to Dr. Thomas Haney. We'll begin with a word of prayer followed by Dr. Tom. Dear Lord, as we continue our study topic centered on abortion, may you guide us to find truths that you would want for each of us. Continue to bless and inspire our teacher, Dr. Haney, as he delivers the lesson. I would like to thank you for all you have done to grow the Hope Looks Up Ministries. May it continue to bless all those who hear your word through these teaching. In Jesus' name, Tom.
Well, thank you, Chuck, and thank you each one for being here. And we're so glad that you're a part of our study tonight. Thank you for joining Hope Looks Up Ministries. As we continue to look at current events and see how they match biblical prophecies, we see, as we looked at last week, the laws of the United States have had a tremendous influence on the rest of the world, which leads to the question of tonight, and that is literally this. Is the abortion debate an end-time barometer or just an issue that helps shape our time as it goes right now? It's very clear from the Old Testament that God did not tolerate his people sacrificing or destroying their children, either through the fires of Moloch. Moloch was the god that had his bowl that was put out with his arms underneath the bowl, and they sacrificed their firstborn. They could sacrifice other children if they had thought they had a reason. Baal was also a god that they sacrificed children to. He was a god of fruition or fertility. That doesn't crazy, doesn't it? That you would sacrifice your child so God would make you more fertile, but the fertility they were after was grain. So if there was a drought or there was a difficulty with pestilence, then you sacrifice a child, these will disappear and go on from there. But God abhorred this. He absolutely talked about how awful this was. And it's the destruction that we're a part of that. Obviously, deception and accusations have been a strong part of the abortion debate in the United States. Because for 49 years, our nation has claimed to be one nation under God and has deceived into believing that abortion is a political issue with political solutions. And I want you to realize, with few exceptions, maybe slavery and the rights of women, some things like that, there's been very few issues that our government has ever tried to make moral laws about. Abortion has hardly any feed out in any other area, except it's just the destruction of a child, and yet it has become a political issue. So there's a lot of deception going on in that area. There's no other way to explain how our nation could oversee and condone the destruction of over 64 million babies in these 49 years. Choice has proven to be a false god. The idea that somehow choice is supreme is just ridiculous. Choice can't be supreme in anything. So the idea that choice is supreme in this area is really such a bad thing. It has demanded the death of those American babies. It's raised a culture of wanton self-idolization and violence. God was unwavering in his denunciation of this abominable practice in the Old Testament and those who allowed it to be in the land. And many times he exterminated the people who were actually doing child sacrifices because he felt it was so abhorrent to what he wanted to do with his people. God does not change. He will not be mocked. As we witness the rage that has ensued following the June 24th, 2022 Supreme Court ruling that Roe versus Wade is unconstitutional, I think one of the questions that I ask, and maybe you're asking too, is who's being served by these continuing abortions? If it's 4 million a year, I mean, is it just the women who want these abortions, or is there a whole conglomerate of things that all go with it? I'm not going to deal with that very much, but I just want us to see that it seems like it has some political and economic legs too, not just legal. Rabbi Jonathan Cahn pointed out that we're in the 50th year since Roe versus Wade. And he said in the Bible, the 50th year is Jubilee. In the Old Testament, God set it up. The year of restitution, when he said, what is taken is restored and that which is done is reversed. A Jubilee is a demonstration of grace, something that invokes celebration in the midst of humility. 50 years ago, the United States Supreme Court handed down the infamous Roe versus Wade decision. In an instant, the court legalized abortion throughout America, the United States. Since then, the United States has tolerated much more liberal and unrestrictive abortion laws than every other Western nation. The only ones who have even worse abortion laws are mostly communist countries like China and North Korea that are trying to just limit the amount of people that they have born into their countries. The Supreme Court overturned that decision last summer. A majority opinion with its concept echoes the overturning of previous decisions. Ones that enabled slavery. We had laws that made slavery legal, denied rights to women. We had many laws that said women were not equal to men, legalized discrimination and other injustices. And many Christians who have been praying for an end to abortion have reason to praise God, because this is the first clink in the armor in some ways, we might say. Several voices on the left are already making sure that this battle is not over. It didn't end abortion, it just pushes it back to the states, for the states to decide what's constitutional for them. The idea of 50 states having to have abortion was declared unconstitutional. Individual states can still have the abortion in whatever way they vote. America is at a moral and spiritual crossroads. Political officials are pledging to promote abortion in blue states, even saying that they will pay for women who are living in states that will not allow abortion to go and receive the abortion, pay for the travel, pay for all the expenses. The choice is ours. To me, we're at a point that mirrors the challenge that Elijah, battling the prophets of Baal, gave to the nation of Israel. In 1 Kings 18, Elijah said, "How long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him." The passage concludes, and I thought this was ironic, the people said nothing. So at a moral point of chaos, we need to realize that God does expect us to stand up and say something. The same question hangs over our society right now. We're wavering between two opinions. One advocates the protection of innocent life, while the other encourages the woman to make the choice of whether she wants an abortion or a birth. This is one of the central choices of our nation. So my encouragement is all of us to follow the advice of the psalmist, who said this in Psalm 62, "Truly my soul finds rest in God. My salvation comes from him. Truly he is my rock and my salvation. He is my fortress. I will never be shaken." So the key thing is to follow what God says we're to do, not to follow what anybody else would say. Paramount to making the choice is to make sure you have a worldview that includes God and all that he's written. Worldview, a definition, is the lens through which we perceive everything. It offers us a framework to build our perception of reality, and whether we know it or not, we all have a worldview. Most of us have a Christian worldview, so we see things through Christian eyesight. That's why sometimes when people say things to us or do certain things, we go, "I don't even understand." Well, no, because your worldview wouldn't tolerate those things, wouldn't even accept that as an option. So that's the worldview that you have. Additionally, the West ascribed to a Judeo-Christian worldview. That's not to claim that everybody was either Jewish or Christian, but merely that society was built around some common understandings, including one, there is an objective reality. Now, that's not true anymore. People say there's no absolute truths. They'll say it all the time. You can even have a young child will tell you that. And if there's no absolute truth, then there's no absolute reality. Reality is your perception of reality, and that's what they'll tell you. Moral law is immutable and handed down from God, not invented or imposed by humanity. And now we're talking about restitution laws. You know, if a law was not equal, then let's do another not equal law to make up for the unequalness of the first law. We're kind of playing games with laws, quite honestly. We're just sort of trying to figure out how to make this all work, because there is not a sense of, okay, what is the overall theme here? And then each person is accountable to a judge who will execute perfect justice in due time. Our own founders adopted a Christian understanding of the sinful nature of man. And that's why we have so many checks and balances in our way of government. We have checks and balances in our way of government so that we couldn't have a king. We couldn't have a prime minister who made all the decisions and nobody had any say. We couldn't have a treasurer or somebody who decided to take all the money in the kingdom and spend it somewhere else. And so they respected the sovereignty of God and trusted that he would act as the ultimate judge. So set up these checks and balances and let that all work its way out. Without navigating the role of other influences, there can be no denying the impact of such a Judeo-Christian worldview. Western civilization thrived, elevating the value of human life, prizing the importance of human ingenuity, realizing the greatest, most widespread prosperity in the history of the world. And I want us to realize several things that kind of prove that. Child labor laws all originated in Christian countries. Many nations still have child laborers that are not, they're not Christian. They may be something else. They may call themselves a very religious country like Bangladesh, being Muslim, but they still have their children employed for usually nothing. Many of the areas of need, like hospitals and schools and foundations, came out of Christian nations that felt like, you know, we need to establish something better here. Western civilization thrived. It was successful in that area. All this was possible because Western societies collectively understood that God reigns above the affairs of men, and we will all answer to him in the end. Now that is really quite a great collector. If everybody feels they're going to stand before God and be judged by God, then they behave differently than if they don't. However, interestingly enough, as we looked at last week, we now have people that don't even believe in the Lord, don't believe in Jesus, don't believe in God, but they talk about their friends going to heaven. So it's kind of, I don't know who's in charge of this heaven. Kind of makes me wonder. Starting in European universities and spreading to the United States, came a new worldview called higher criticism. Now, higher criticism, I certainly had a long taste of that through my many years in school, but higher criticism is really trying to take an effort to attempt to look at things and objectively decide if they're really what they say they are or what they don't say they are. And it changed every segment of our society. It literally has challenged not only truth claims that have been handed down by generations, but also the very idea that there is an objective truth. Higher criticism basically said, there is no truth. How do you know truth? A famous entertainer, if I told you her name, you'd know exactly what I'm talking about. Maybe you've heard her say this often enough. She regularly talks about your truth versus my truth, as if truth is so transitory that it shifts from person to person, that your truth could be different than my truth could be different than your truth. Jewish philosopher and scholar Dennis Prager affirms the danger of the path we are on. He said, if America abandons its Judeo-Christian values and the bias that they're on in the central role of the Jewish and Christian Bibles, as its founding guide test, we're all in big trouble. He said, especially most of Americans, non-Christians. And he used as his illustration the Jews in World War II when the European nations became secular. The Jews became fodder. And he's saying non-Christians would suffer more than anyone else if that was what happened in America. And that's in his previous book, America Founded to be Free, Not Secular. The change in the worldview of the United States has certainly impacted the area of abortion. The mere fact that it was once legal, all abortions, even full term, has put tremendous pressure on many to believe that they lost a right. They lost a freedom. They had a freedom. The court took it away from them. If you'll listen, that's basically what's being said. We had this freedom. Now the court has removed it and we no longer have this freedom. I think what Proverbs says is so true. Where there is no vision, the people are unrestrained. Unless there's a common understanding of purpose and agreed upon vision, there is no unity of effort or purpose. When people cannot even agree on a set of principles, a society will inevitably turn on itself. In other words, if we can't all agree what's truth and what's real, then everybody will just turn on each other over what they think is the truth or what they think is real. Certainly, if Thomas Jefferson were alive today and writing our documents of the government, there's no way our current Congress would agree to embrace the phrase, "We hold these truths to be self-evident." I thought this was pretty amazing. I read this and then I added to it, but it was just amazing to me. Some would argue against any truth being self-evident. In other words, how do you know it's truth? It's truth to you, it's not truth to me. While others would challenge whose truth, while others would still deny the validity of knowing truth whatsoever. Certainly, we have never lived up to our own lofty words of trying to, have a Judeo-Christian nation. But there was a time when we at least aspired to serve as a city on a hill, a beacon of truth and freedom. Today, many within our own country exhibit a loathing for these very goals. Given over to lusts, degrading passions, depraved minds, as described in Romans 1, they're no longer able to discern truth and actually make a lot of moral decisions based on political currents. Test the wind. Okay, that's what we believe. 60% believe that. That's what we believe. So when the discussion is done and prophecies are reviewed, we will not see that abortion is an end-time indicator. There's nowhere in the Bible that it says one of the things that will happen in the end times is abortions will increase. But it is much more the result of what happens when people quit living by a godly good and decide to do only the things that support what they want to do. Romans 1:29 said that God gave them over to every kind of wickedness, evil, greed, and depravity. Seems clear to me that the destruction of the babies of this land would be both wicked and evil. And to be able to convince yourself that the child in the womb is not a real human would mean that depravity has become a part of your outlook on life. Paul said that when people are given over to their own desires, they'll be full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, and malice. It's not hard to see that abortion and the fruits of abortion fit well into several of these categories. It seems to me that abortion is not a barometer of the end times. It's more a barometer of how low the value of life has become in our nation. That people are expendable. And one of the things we need to realize at our age, if babies are expendable, the next one expendable are the elderly. And the next ones will be the handicapped. You just follow the Nazi line right down the system if you are going to take morality out of what is happening. I would be concerned that life for the unborn has become so callous. They have no way to speak up, but it could spread. Now, I want to just shift gears a little bit here in this 8th lesson, because one of the questions asked in our study here really intrigued me. And I thought, I didn't give the greatest answer last week, so I'm going to give you a much better answer tonight, okay? I hope, anyhow. On the recent questions of one of our study prompted me to take the last half of this lesson and speak directly to it. The question was this: all my life, I've heard every generation say, the current events means that Christ will come back now, soon, right now, this time. Is every generation, if every generation thinks that, is it really going to end someday? This person's saying, is it ever going to end? I think this is a great question and one that we probably all ask ourselves. Are we just caught up in being the next generation that says, oh yeah, this has to be the time when Christ comes back? So I wanted to take part of the lesson and deal with some of the events that are unique to this time and this generation, because I think that's important. Now, it's true that wars, rumors of wars, pestilence, plagues, natural disasters, floods, volcanoes, hurricanes, tornadoes have always been with us. It is also true the Bible says in time they will get like birth pangs. They'll become more frequent and more intense. But we all might still wonder, are there signs that are truly unique to this time and day? Signs that have never existed before? Are there new signs that clearly point to this period of history as a time when God returns? And I think the answer is yes. So I've listed several here, and I hope that you this sparks a little interest in you and maybe a little desire to study a little more. Daniel 12 gives an interesting discussion between the prophet and the prophet giver, the man giving the message. Daniel tells of some events that are will only be in place in the time of Christ's return. And Daniel in 12:8 says this, I've heard, but I do not understand. What do these events mean? In other words, even though Daniel was describing them as God told him to write them down, they were so far beyond his understanding that he had no idea what that was even talking about. So Daniel is told by God, you're writing this, just leave it alone. Well, that isn't quite what he said, but he says, go on your way, Daniel, for these words are concealed and sealed up until the end times. So the prophet was not to understand everything that he was writing. There would be a time in which it would be revealed and then people could understand. And I think for too long, we felt that that would just be when Christ comes. We have all these mysteries, Jesus appears, and wow, every mystery is just taken care of. They're all just immediately handled. And I don't think that's really what the Bible is saying. Because God finishes this discussion with Daniel by saying, those who have insight will understand. So we've always had those who have looked prophetically at what's happening in the Bible in every generation and have interpreted, sometimes wrongly, sometimes rightly, how that would play itself out. The fact that these have become understandable only in the last decades show God is revealing more than ever before. One, let's take the population of the world. The population of the world is now slightly over 6 billion people. It's actually about 6.7. I think I saw a month or two ago, they said we'd hit 7 billion. So these numbers are about a year old. So just live with them, please. Okay, but around 7 billion people. That means that 1/2 of a billion people will die in the initial judgment. 1.5 billion will die in the initial judgments of Revelation. 1/4 of the earth will be extinguished, reducing the world's population to 4.5 billion. The next series of judgments recorded in Revelation 8 and 9 will kill another 1/3 of mankind. 1/3 of 4.5 billion is another 1.5 billion people. Thus, in the first 3.5 years of tribulation, a total of 3+ billion people will die. That will be almost 1/2 of the population of the world. Now, I'm not saying that God can't do that, but what I am saying is we've never had any war or any kind of destruction where that sort of thing happened. The unparalleled carnage of the tribulation seems to me to point to nuclear weapons. Revelation 8 speaks of 1/3 of the earth being burned and 1/3 of the earth being polluted, the seas being polluted. Later in the tribulation, near the end, we're told that the people will suffer loathsome and malignant sores, Revelation 16:2, which sounds like the effects of radiation poisoning. The prophecies concerning the tribulation carnage have clearly depended upon major technological breakthrough for their understanding. And that breakthrough occurred in July 16, 1945, when the first atomic bomb was exploded in New Mexico. And when the first hydrogen bomb was exploded in 1952, we entered the era for the first time that we could inflict upon ourselves the kind of carnage described in the book of Revelation. Up until then, it would have had to have been God. It would have had to have been something God did. Now mankind out of control can do the same thing. He can destroy half of the world. Second, the army of 200 million, which was one of the questions that Charlie asked us earlier. Chapters 9 and 16 of Revelation state that an army of 200 million soldiers will march from the east towards Israel. Daniel 11 indicates this will be an army representing nations in revolt against the Antichrist. Demographers estimate that the total population of the world at the time the Apostle John wrote the book of Revelation, 95 AD, was only 200 million. So that would have been kind of a wild prophetic statement, wouldn't it? How could an army that size march out of the east? It made no sense. In fact, it took 1,650 years for the world's population to double to 400 million. At the beginning of last century, the 20th, the total world population was only 1.6 billion, still too small for an army of 200 million to march from the east. But the 20th century has witnessed an exponential increase in population. Population count is now 7 million. And one country to the east of Israel, namely China, presently has an armed service force of 200 million. 200 million uniformed Chinese are in their military. Fourth, the observation of the two dead witnesses in the streets of Jerusalem for 3.5 days. We're told that in the middle of the tribulation period, two witnesses will come to Jerusalem and will be very successful. The Antichrist will kill the two witnesses in Jerusalem. Revelation further states their dead bodies will lie in the streets, and there's a real typo, so change this, please, for 3.5 days. It's not 4.5. The Bible never uses 4 that way. 3, 7, 12. Come on, we know all those magic numbers, and 4 is not one of them. For 3.5 days, and that all the people of the world will look upon them. Prior to 1956, that prophecy was not understandable in natural terms. There was just no way that all the people of the world could look upon two dead bodies on the streets of Jerusalem. But all that changed in October 4th, 1957, when the Russians sent the first satellite, Sputnik, into space. Today, almost 56 years later, our planet has many man-made satellites circling it, making possible all sorts of instantaneous communications. In fact, I have several pastors in Pakistan and Africa who connected with me and linked up, and they all say, "Do you use WhatsApp?" I don't use WhatsApp, so I say no, but their intention is that they will just have daily conversation with me from Pakistan or India or Kenya or Uganda or wherever they are, and we will just be in instant communication. And with that comes FaceTime. You can see the other person. Several of them send me videos, and I'm watching their church service, and it's in the middle of India or some obscure part of Pakistan, and I see it the day it happens. They send it on Sunday right after, because they're 12 hours ahead. They send it on Sunday right after it happens, and I wake up and there's my video ready to hear and see. No doubt that would have been possible now because modern terminology has made it understandable, and the world understands it. No, nobody has any trouble with that one. Fifth, the nation of Israel has been restored as a nation again. Sixth, the image of the Antichrist being able to speak and pronounce things about people, death to them or punishments to them. But all we have to do is remember our last trip to Disneyland, and all the robots stand up and do their speaking in the natural voice of who they are. And we realize that actors are many times portrayed by robots. Politicians have been portrayed by robots. Other people have as well. So once again, that's not going to be an issue in our day and age, just even seeing a natural solution. The mark of the beast, another prophecy in Revelation 13, is dependent on modern technology. Is a famous one that states the Antichrist will control the world's economy by requiring people to bear his mark. This would have not been possible before the invention of the laser, unless you're just talking about tattoos, and computer technology combined with the positioning of orbital satellites. Such technology is already greatly advanced. We become almost a cashless society, and almost everybody's purchase is done with a credit card. To prevent that card being lost or stolen, just embedding that code on your hand will solve the problem. So it could be very easy for the mark of the beast to be something that people take innocently and then find out later it is controlling them and controlling their economy. The Euphrates River, I made a mention of this once before, but I think this is pretty fascinating. In chapters 9 and 14 of Revelation, we're told that the army of 200 million, led by the kings from the east, will march across Asia towards Israel during the tribulation, most likely a revolt against the Antichrist. And Revelation 16:12 indicates that this army will be held up by the Euphrates River until its water is suddenly dried up, enabling them to cross over and proceed to the valley of Armageddon. Well, the Lord could dry that water up. He certainly made a path through the Red Sea. He created a path through the Jordan River. But we also need to see something very interesting has happened, that it can be accomplished with natural means. In 1990, Turkey completed the construction of a massive Ataturk Dam on the Euphrates. It's up in the mountains, probably somewhere around Noah's Ark. Same name of the same mountains. So, but anyhow, they have this large lake up in the mountains of Turkey before the river flows down into the land of Iraq, and it is able to shut off the water. In fact, they cut off the flow of the river in order to fill up the lake behind the dam in 1991. This action almost resulted in war between Iraq and Turkey. So it's very, very possible. These are just some of the signs from the book of Revelation that needed the additional technology for them to be able to see that even mankind could accomplish these without just miracles from God. Let's look at a few unique signs for this generation that are just not in the book of Revelation. Daniel 12:4 tells us that the speed of transportation, the volume of knowledge will greatly increase in the end times. We witnessed the fulfillment of this prophecy in our lifetime. When the 20th century began, most people still traveled the same way that they had since the dawn of human history, walking, running, or riding an animal or being pulled by an animal. But since that time, we now have autos, bullet trains, supersonic airplanes, spaceships, and all of this developed in 80 years. So we went from a group that either walked or rode animals or were pulled by animals to no animals involved, no walking involved for many, and just riding all of these other things. Similarly, the growth of knowledge has been overwhelming. Technical knowledge is doubling every 2 years. One edition of the New York Times Sunday edition contains more information than the average person in the 19th century was exposed to in a lifetime. Through the World Wide Web, I can almost instantaneously access research resources all over the world. With a click of the computer key, I can go from the Vatican Library to the Library of Congress to the Jerusalem Museum. The growth in communication speed is breathtaking. In the 19th century, it would have taken months for news of internal wars within a country to surface, but now we have it on our nightly news. So when a couple of countries in South America recently had some sort of riots, even though they were in Ecuador, up in the hills, we watched it on news that night. Colombia had a run-in the middle of their country. We watched it on news that night. It's possible for us to see anything, anytime, anywhere that it is happening. And some spiritual signs are also unique to this generation. Key to the growth is the massive Christian crusades. Starting again with Billy Graham, which uniquely happened, the rise of his crusades uniquely happened right after Israel became a country. I always thought that's kind of an interesting fact, but the Christian crusades have continued. Now, they're not as big in the United States, but they're still big in certain areas of the world. African and Asian crusades still reach thousands of people, and in many, many times. Then the growth of the charismatic movement, when the focus of the power of the Holy Spirit with the explosive Pentecostal movement, the use of satellites and smartphones, the Jesus film shown to over 1 billion people, the 1040 movement, which focuses on reaching the 97% of the world that lives in that corridor just off of the equator, makes this generation the most far-reaching generation ever. Jesus prophesied in Matthew 24, "The gospel of the kingdom shall be preached to the whole world for the witness of all nations, and then the end shall come." Now, every nation does not have the Bible in their native tongue, but we're close. But every nation has now heard the gospel, either through the Jesus film or through somebody sharing with them in a second language that's been interpreted. We're truly living in a unique age. Historical developments and technological inventions are making it possible for us to understand that many end-time prophecies, for the very first time, can actually visualize how they could happen just by events just occurring. We truly have never had another generation like this one. Chuck, let me turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Tom. I don't know, I just really eat this up. It's fascinating to think the years that we have been alive and how things have changed and how things have grown the way they have. It's amazing. And this just kind of ties it together with what might happen in times. Well, thank you, Tom, for another great message. I will be posting tonight's lesson on the Hope Looks Up YouTube site on Thursday, and the notes will be available on Sunday. For those who would like to participate, prayer time will begin now.